We talked to Miki Reynolds, CEO and co-founder of Grid110, a startup accelerator. We talk about what a startup accelerator is, the types of companies that are primed to benefit from a startup accelerator program, and the pivots that companies have made during the 2020-2021 COVID pandemic. Interesting to note is that many of the companies in the current cohort of startups in the accelerator program this summer are actually companies started during the pandemic, which is a very interesting fact. Let's jump right into this week's episode of the LA Business Podcast. Welcome to the LA Business Podcast, your destination to hear stories of how businesses grow and scale. I'm Robert Brill, CEO of Brill Media and the host of this podcast. Now, let's jump right into this week's interview. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the LA Business Podcast. Please welcome Miki Reynolds, co-founder and executive director of Grid110, an LA-based early-stage startup accelerator and community development nonprofit. Miki has a unique perspective on what equitable, inclusive paths to entrepreneurship can look like. Thanks for being with us today, Miki.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
So how did you come to create a startup accelerator? That sounds very interesting.
It's interesting. I talk to a lot of people about, transitioning into careers and people that are interested in getting into tech and venture. And a lot of advice is to work at a startup accelerator because you get to work with so many different companies, especially at the early stage. For me, it was starting a startup accelerator. And so very much a joint effort. 7 of us about 6 years ago lived or worked in downtown LA. Had the shared vision of downtown becoming the next startup ecosystem and startup hub. We saw that most of the startup activity in Los Angeles was centered around the west side, so Santa Monica, Venice, Playa Vista. But for those of us that live 16 miles to the east, not always easy to get to Santa Monica for an event or a meeting and things like that. And Los Angeles is so geographically spread out that we just felt that there was opportunities to kind of contribute to creating these pocket communities that were in our own backyards. And we felt really strongly about downtown LA being the next epicenter and home for that.
Absolutely. And it's such a great opportunity. Tell us about what a startup accelerator does.
Yeah. So typically they are time-based programs, usually around 3 months, maybe a little bit longer or shorter. You work in a cohort, so you're in a group of other founders that are starting or growing their businesses. Typically, you go through different like weekly content sessions, meeting with advisors and mentors, just different things that will help you along your path to entrepreneurship. I think the huge value add for being in a program like this is the community element of it. So the people that you get access to, not just from like the subject matter expert to the people that have done it before, but also just your fellow entrepreneurs that you're going through the program with. So the peer mentorship aspect of not having to, go this path alone, I think is tremendously helpful to be around a table of people that are, maybe a few steps ahead, a few steps behind, just to feel like you're not isolated working in a bubble by yourself.
And what do entrepreneurs learn in this process? Because I've been around this world, but I never really knew what an accelerator does. I've met people who've been through accelerators, but I just don't like it's like to me it's like a black box. Can you demystify it a little bit?
Sure. I think at the heart of it, a lot of it is just stress testing your business, the things that you know and you don't know, depending on where you are in your journey. Maybe you are at the, kind of still in the ideation stage, or maybe you've actually launched something. But particularly for first-time founders, this is your first time doing it. You're not really sure the steps that you need to take. So a lot of it is really, stress testing, getting feedback. You have assumptions about certain things, who your customers are, what the problem is that you're solving, who has that problem, and is the particular solution that you've identified a good fit for that. So we at Grid110 spend the first month kind of really digging into the foundational elements of your business and making sure that you have a strong foundation in order to move forward with. We don't talk about funding until like several weeks later because you want to make sure that you're starting with a good foot, that you feel like, either are able to validate what you've already built, or are able to pivot if necessary, to make the appropriate changes to the business that you're trying to build.
And when you talk about foundation, can you expand on that? Like what should an entrepreneur be thinking about when they think about having a good, strong foundation?
Yeah, the first thing that we start talking about is the problem. So what is the problem that you as an entrepreneur are solving? And I think problem solving is at the heart of entrepreneurship and design thinking. And so I think to have an entrepreneurial mindset, you're genuinely curious. You see the world as, there are inefficiencies or things that could be solved with technology or innovation. And so what is it the problem that you're solving? Who has that problem? Being able to validate that, talking to potential people that might have this problem, don't have an answer to it, use something, but it takes them too much time, are not happy with the current solution that they have. And so everything really starts with like what is your why? The Simon Sinek has a really great leadership talk on understanding what your why is from a leadership perspective. I think that also plays to the heart of entrepreneurs as well.
And coming out of this program, what are entrepreneurs and their teams set up to do coming out of Grid 110?
So, because we see entrepreneurs at different stages of their journeys, they could be, their focus is to validate the problem solution, value proposition. They just want to make sure they've got a good, solid foundation. For others, they, might be at the point of pivoting, and so are trying to figure out which direction should I go in, and what should I be focusing on for the duration of this program. Some are looking on the fundraising side, and they just want to make sure that they understand how the fundraising process works, and are they equipped to move forward with that path. And what is the path that makes the most sense for them? Is it VC? Is it equity crowd investing platforms? Is it other types of non-dilutive funding options? So because we don't work solely with venture scale companies, we work with all types of different businesses. We want to make sure that you understand there are different ways to build a business. There are different funding paths for those types of businesses. And so being able to talk through the different options, we found to be really helpful. So there's no demo day at the end of our program. It really is geared towards, what is it that you're trying to accomplish this 12 weeks? How can we help you get there?
And I understand you have a new cohort of companies that you
Mhm.
just announced. Can you tell us a little bit about, before you talk about those companies, I want to understand, how do companies get accepted into this program?
Yep. So we run programs a couple of times a year. There's an application and an interview process. We just onboarded our summer cohort, so we just kicked off with that program. So typically, when we do announce the next cycle, there's an application, fairly straightforward application that you fill out. Just giving us a chance to understand, what is the problem that you're solving. Why are you as a team uniquely positioned to solve this problem? Like, tell us about yourselves. Do you have like a background in this? Tell us about what community means to you, and why are you interested in a program like ours? Because we don't give funding, but we also don't charge or take equity from you. We attract really incredible types of companies that are looking for support, that are looking for community, that want to have access to resources that our community gets access to. So it's kind of understanding, like, how does community play a role for you as an entrepreneur? How are you active in your community? Because it's such a pillar and core value of ours. And then there's a review and a selection process. And then we pick anywhere from 15 to 20 companies to work with at a given time.
Wow. And so tell us about the new cohort of companies coming in for summer.
Yeah, so we're working with 15 incredible companies, kind of spanning all across Los Angeles in different sectors, stages, industries. So anything from a biotech company to a brick and mortar burrito company, and things in between. And so it's really unique just in terms of the approaches that each of these companies had. So I mentioned a burrito company, that there's innovation in food. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're building a high tech company in order to, bring something unique and valuable to light. They've just sought a different way of being able to provide the type of food that they felt like was missing to a particular type of demographic and their customer. We've got a company that is building a platform to trade sneakers. So instead of having to purchase sneakers, and trying to figure out, are these legitimate? There's companies like Goat like that exist out there. What if I could just trade for what I already have and use my existing inventory of shoes to trade to somebody else, or like to level up to something else? And so again, just finding different ways to, I guess, enhance people's lives. And the innovation that's occurring. It's just, Los Angeles is so full of these creative minds. And we only accept about 10 to 15% of companies. So that's another 85% of companies that are doing really wildly creative things that we just don't have the bandwidth to support. But I love seeing more of these types of companies emerging from Los Angeles, particularly post-pandemic.
So I'm looking at your website, and one of the companies I'm familiar with, Dirty Cookie in
Yeah.
Orange County. That's very cool. I see their number one. I see their ads, but I'm in a group called Entrepreneurs Organization, and somehow through an event during the pandemic. They basically not, I mean, it wasn't not an in-person event. They sent us stuff, and I got a dirty cookie, and I loved it. It was such a unique thing.
Yeah, the founder has an incredible story too. So she's a former aerospace project manager,
Whoa.
turned dirty cookie chef. She had aspirations of becoming an entrepreneur, and this has kind of been the evolution of it. So it started as doing catering and events, and they have a brick and mortar location. The pandemic hit, and all of their business was, out the window because those events weren't happening anymore. So they got creative and innovative. They came up with a DIY kit that they were selling online, and then they got featured a Good Morning America. They got featured on like the Kardashians, I think Snapchat. There were like viral TikTok moments that have really helped them just be able to capture a whole new market. And I think I just saw on LinkedIn, Shahira, the founder, just hosted they had their first in-person event, and
Mm.
so things are kind of coming back to quote unquote normal for them now.
Yeah, I mean, as a I'm always on the hunt for cool like corporate gifts, both for
Hmm.
our employees and for clients, and that is such a cool gift. So as we look at the pandemic, tell us about Grid 110 and what happened over the last year and a half. Did you have companies that you were mentoring and working with? And I'm interested in two things. What did you guys do over the last year
Hmm.
and a half? And then secondly, what do you think the future of business looks like, considering the trends you're seeing, the fact that you're touching so many different types of companies and so many different verticals?
Yeah. So for the first, I guess, 5 years of running programs, we were always in person. So we ran in person kind of classroom style programs where the founders got to sit around a table, and actually connect with each other. And it was a huge valuable aspect of our community building just because of the organic relationships that would develop. The founders got to work out of the space that we were in. We had a partnership with a co-working space across campus in downtown LA. And so it became this like innovation hub for people to come, and they wanted to come in early before sessions or work out of there from the daytime. And I think we were about to get ready to launch our spring program, which was kicking off the first week of April in 2020. And early March, we saw the indicators that things were not looking good. Schools had already gone remote. And so we made the quick decision to go remote ourselves. And so the team has, since March of last year, has been working from home. But like huge kudos and credit to our team for being able to turn around and launch a virtual program on time. And we haven't really stopped since then. So we ran
Mm.
kind of back to back programs for spring, summer, fall, and winter of this year, and just kept providing support. I think that we felt really lucky that things like Zoom existed, and enabled us to not only from a team perspective be able to do the work that we need to do from the safety of our own homes, but to continue providing support to our entrepreneurs, where we're providing support to our alumni community who is looking for grants and federal aid resources. What are how can we navigate the PPP, and so being able to connect them with workshops and other people that were doing stuff, and a ton of aid resources. I think it allowed our community to really come alive in the digital format. So we're all on Slack, and it still allowed us to provide support to both alumni as well as the current founders that we were working with.
What is your opinion on whether companies should bring people back to the office?
I think it's a decision that each company has to make for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think if you're seeing, some of these trends that the largest companies are able to go, fully remote. And I think the benefits that come, with that, of being able to foster that type of working environment, the flexibility to attract talent from anywhere, to be anywhere, you don't have to deal with the overhead costs of the office space. But I do get that for some teams and dynamics and companies that it does, make more sense to be in person. I don't think we plan on going back into an office. I think our team feels really comfortable and enjoys kind of the remote work. I mean, our programs are going to likely continue to be remote, and so there's really no reason for our team to come in. And I think that they've all adjusted and adapted to this type of lifestyle. And so I think it's been encouraging our team and even the founders that we work with to make sure that you're finding some sort of boundaries around work and life. It can be really hard when you're working and living in the same space. And maybe you might work a little longer than you normally would if you have the physical boundaries of being in an office and going to and from work. So I think it's been about really encouraging from a mental health and wellness perspective for our own team as well as founders to find and create those boundaries, and make sure that you're communicating that with your teammates.
Yeah, I find we're our team is fully remote, and I hadn't even thought of it, but it recently came up that like you really can't ensure that people are going to stay safe in your physical spaces now, and that's
Yeah.
the primary challenge. And there's so much opportunity when the business is fully remote, and it's difficult. It's not a slam dunk, but it ends up working really well once you've sorted out all the nuances there. Um, so tell us about tell us about kind of like the trends you're seeing with business as we go into kind of like the new world, right? The old world ended March
Mhm.
2020, uh, 2019 and 2018 and 2017 are black and white. Now we have full vivid color. We have masks everywhere. We have these various strains. What are the trends you're seeing with business owners and entrepreneurs and how they're structuring their businesses? Like what do you predict for the future, or what are you seeing the trends happening now?
Yeah, I mean, I think because of the remote nature of work, that's given rise to all different types of businesses that are supporting remote work culture. So whether it's tools that are existing on top of Slack or Zoom to improve or enhance the experience in some way, or even from a culture and team building perspective. There's a company I know called Seshi, and they do kind of fully virtual team building, culture building experiences. So whether it's you're looking for like a team bonding thing, or you want to bring in a speaker that talks about burnout, or how can we be an anti-racist team and community, and so having this kind of marketplace and access to data-driven engagement results of how your team is actually performing, or how they're feeling engaged as an employee, because they have access to these types of resources. I think that the previously when you were in person, you maybe had office perks, whether it's like snacks or lunches and things like that. And so now there are companies that are doing really well because they're providing more holistic or flexible work from home benefit types of of things that maybe better suit the needs of the individual. We actually work with a company called June, and it allows us to give kind of an allotment of money. So instead of doing like a gym stipend, or a mental health stipend, they get a stipend to use whatever they want to across several different categories that support individual mental health, wellness, education, continued learning, fitness. And so people can decide for themselves if they want to use that for fitness, if you want to use it for like masterclass. So I think things like that just make it easy for me as an employer and running the company to not have to think about reimbursements and expensifying things. And it actually is just run through a platform that makes it super seamless. I think enabling things like that from like a workplace culture. How can we provide a better experience for our employees? And I think the overall like theme that I'm seeing is around health and wellness. So a lot of the companies that we've seen from an application perspective that apply to our programs fall into the health and wellness category. So whether it's making mental health more accessible, or it has something to do with just improving our lives post pandemic. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of at home fitness things taking off. Peloton, Fight Camp. So lots of these connected tech devices that are just again being able to bring people the routines that they had before from the safety of their own home. So I think having access to things from wherever you need it, not having to be in a fixed place, is something a trend that we're seeing a lot more, and I imagine that we'll continue to see.
So, and I'm not specifically looking at the dirty cookie, but that's the one that comes to mind, right? You have a company that kind of pivoted during the pandemic. I mean, the key question for me is, do these companies change their business model to have this kind of like remote, send a package or whatever it is? That does that continue into the future, or do you think 5 years from now, like companies like the Dirty Cookie and many other types of companies and many different types of verticals, do you think we'll see them revert back to like in person events, or do you think that it's a foregone conclusion like that, like these companies will continue to have the mail your offer, and set a remote version of their offer or their package or their system. Is that something that you think will persist?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's people are in a like trying to assess what the opportunities are as the world is reopening slowly. I think maybe close to 60% of the companies that we're currently working with started in 2020 or 2021. So
No kidding.
majority of them are pandemic-born businesses. So they saw an opportunity, and whether it had to do with isolation and being at home and wanting to deliver fun party packs to your home, or to having to pivot because your customers changed and you needed to reach them in a different way. So maybe you came out with an altered version of your product like Dirty Cookie did. And so now I think it's trying to navigate as things are starting to open up. For the pandemic born businesses, is the problem still exist? Do your companies, are you still providing a solution, now that the world is kind of slowly starting to evolve again? Do the people still want the thing that you started in the pandemic? Does it have to change, or are you now finding a new customer? So I think people are starting to see the effects of that, where the demand for what they had during the pandemic may be starting to change because people are actually going out, and now you have to reach your customers in a new way. And who knows, what's going to happen, like, the current Delta variant, and where we're going with that. And, the Los Angeles numbers are not looking so great right now. But it's like, how long is this cycle going to keep continuing? And I don't think people are trying to make knee jerk reactions into their business until they really have an idea of what's going to be sustainable, longer term. I think it's really hard to see where we're going to be at the end of this year or even next year. I think everybody's just trying to take it a month at a time.
Much less 5 years from now.
Yeah.
What it does show is that for companies, we now have the tools, and now we have the muscle memory to pivot pretty darn
Hmm.
quickly. Some businesses, it's going to continue to be difficult, like restaurants, right? You can't. I mean, restaurants, I guess you can pivot into delivery or ghost kitchens or whatever the case is. But the point is, for a lot of companies, I think it's probably, if they need to pivot towards market conditions, it won't be such a scary big event as maybe it would have been had going leading up to 2020. If you had to think about pivoting in 2019, it's like, oh, do I really want to focus on this? It's so
Hmm.
hard. It's like so many unknowns. So fascinating. So how does how long are your I'm curious, how long are your cohort sessions? Like how
Yeah.
many months, weeks?
So we run for 12 weeks. So it's a
Okay.
3-month program. We meet once weekly in the evenings. We've just found that to be, from, again, an accessibility standpoint, we don't want to get in the way of you running your business, since many of our founders are working on active businesses right now. So we want to layer in support on top of what you're already doing. We've also found, like, a lot of our founders are parents, and so finding it at a time that might be a little bit more convenient to them. When we were in person, having an evening program for people that hadn't fully, committed to their business. Maybe they were still working their full-time job. They were doing this thing on the side. So to not have to interrupt their 9 to 5 responsibilities and do something that was on the side. And we've just found that time frame seems to have worked for everybody. So again, we try to keep kind of out of your way of running your business, and then provide the weekly program sessions, as well as one-to-one advising hours where you get to meet with our team and talk about anything that's top of mind for you.
So for an entrepreneur who might be listening, and they might think, hey, this is really interesting and I want to apply, like what types of companies, or what are the, not the qualifications, but like what are you looking for in the type of companies that you accept into the program?
Yep. So in terms of, we're industry agnostic, so you can literally be working on in any business industry, with the exception of cannabis. We can't work with cannabis companies. We've
Okay.
seen a lot of retail, e-commerce. We actually started vertically focused around fashion technology for our first 2 years. So we kind of dove deep into fashion tech. So that was e-commerce, wearable technology, software for production and manufacturing, and then about 4 years ago, we wanted to just work with more founders and see who else was out there that needed our support. So we went vertical agnostic. So you can be in any business industry. In terms of stage, ideally, you're a little bit past just the initial idea stage, like back of a napkin, I have an idea for something. What we'd look for is like, have you done at least a little bit of research into the space? Do you maybe have a beta testing group? Do you have a prototype or an MVP, even if you haven't launched anything yet? Do you have designs? Have you just like put in a little bit of sweat effort into an initiative to actually see, can you validate that there's interest in this? Have you talked to some potential customers about it? So that's kind of on the earliest stage that we look for. And then all the way through your post-launch product and marketplace have some sort of traction in terms of users, revenue, maybe early stage funding, and then everything in between. So I'd say typically from like a funding perspective, most of our founders tend to be in like the friends and family angel pre-seed stage. But we also work with a lot of bootstrap founders who maybe aren't as familiar with the different capital options that are available to them. They just have been resourceful enough to start and launch a business and are using the revenue that they're generating to put back into the business, and they want to retain 100% equity or as much as possible. So we try to connect them with the resources that enable them to do so. So from a like a business model, we work with a handful of nonprofits, so you don't have to be a for-profit company. I would say most of the companies are for-profit. I would say 80% are tech or tech-enabled, have some sort of digital component to them. And then we also work with brick and mortar, more traditional small businesses, usually within the first few years of your life existence as a company. And there's some sort of innovative thing that you're doing, or you can kind of articulate like what is innovative or creative about the type of business that you're building. And I think outside of that, it's just, why would a program like ours be beneficial for you? Typically, it's because you're looking for community. And that's usually a huge motivating factor for people, is to be around like-minded, diverse entrepreneurs that you can kind of traverse this crazy journey together with.
Absolutely. And how can people find you and Grid 110?
Yeah, so Grid110, GRID110.org is the website. At Grid110 on all of our social accounts. We're probably the most active on Instagram. Lots of fun content, and we're actually pushing some really fun stuff out. Our team is working on some amplification efforts for the founders that are going through our programs right now. So active on stories and reels there, LinkedIn as well. And then I'm at Mixter on all social media accounts. And please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn also.
And so when is the next application round going to be available, like for the next
So
program?
So we are working on a really exciting and special announcement coming at the end of August, most likely, for a new type of program that is similar but very different to whatever we've launched before. And so that will be the next opportunity. So I would say, follow us on social or sign up for our newsletter. You can sign up on our website to hear about the next program announcements. That's usually the best way that you can hear about it.
Very cool. Miki Reynolds, co-founder and executive director of Grid 110. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Robert.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the LA Business Podcast. If you like what we're doing on this podcast, please consider subscribing on Apple or Google Play, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with your friends. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations for a guest you'd like to hear on this podcast, please email me, robert@brillmedia.co. Thank you. Have a fantastic day.